Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for the 6th episode of Women of Color and Confidence. I am your host, Amber Rose West, and today I am joined by Crowell. We are going to be talking about maintaining a positive self-image while being in white spaces, which I believe is something all Black women have had to figure out over the course of their lives. I'm really excited to have this discussion. And Crystal, thank you so much for joining me.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I am so excited. This is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart, something that I have gone through a lot these last 10 years, and I cannot wait to dive more into it with you.
Yes, me too. I've been looking forward to this chat all week. So before we jump into the topic, would you like to introduce yourself? Give us a little backstory about you, who you are, how you found yourself on the show.
Yeah, so my name's Crystal. I originally grew up a military brat, but I went to high school and college in Virginia. After college, I graduated and moved to Denver for grad school and have been living here for about the last 2.5 years. I am a social worker, really excited, love that. And I am also a pageant title holder, and I'm the current USA National Miss Rocky Mountain 2020.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It was really interesting because I remember when we first sat down to chat, I thought that you had received your title before becoming a social worker, and you were like, no, I became a social worker and then got my crown. And I was like, this is the best story. I love it so much. Beautiful. So let's start back in Virginia, because that's where you went to grad school, correct?
That's where I went to high school and to undergrad.
High school and undergrad. So let's talk a little bit about the communities that you grew up there. Was there diversity inside? Did you experience, racism while you were there?
Yeah, so where I grew up in Northern Virginia, there was no diversity. I would say there was negative diversity, if that's even possible.
Mm-hmm.
I had no friends of color. My first friend of color, we became friends senior year of high school. We actually didn't even go to the same high school. We just worked together at the same restaurant.
Uh-huh.
So it was definitely not a diverse experience. People didn't have a lot of diverse backgrounds. And up until then, I had mostly lived on like military bases, which are very diverse. So it was kind of a culture shock for me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of what I wouldn't have noticed or said at the time was racism, but looking back and reflecting, there was a lot of racism going on.
Mm-hmm. How did it hit you during the years that you were like growing up?
During the years I was growing up, I just felt so out of place. And I like looking back, I'm like, Crystal, of course, it's because you're the only Black girl there. But
Yeah.
not even knowing that, I just felt so out of place. I honestly just felt like this permanent ugly duckling. All of my friends, were so pretty and tall, and they got so much attention from people, and people were telling them they should be models and all this stuff. And it, almost sounds shallow looking back, but I was kind of like, well, what's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is raving about all of these people, but like, my parents and my grandma think I'm beautiful, but like, that's it.
Yeah. Did people ever outright say to you as kids, like those differentiating comments about like the way you looked compared to the way other people looked?
People made comments about my hair.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was very scared to wear my natural hair. I think I had braids, and then I had gotten a relaxer, and then I had a weave. So people made comments about my hair, and I think that should have been an indicator to me, but it wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
But that was mostly, people made comments about my hair, and then people would just tell me to my face that I was ugly.
Oh man, I had that too. And I grew up in San Diego, and I felt like there were a lot of comments, one way or the other, that was like, "Oh, it's good that you did something to your hair this way now so it doesn't look so, with all the other things." And you're like, "Okay, like I don't really know what that's supposed to mean." But growing up, it definitely like has an impact on how you view yourself, because it's like this constant like me against them kind of idea.
For sure. And it was the same thing where it would be either like your hair, like there would be like negative comments, or it'd be like, oh, your hair looks great today. You should do this every day. And
Hmm.
you're kind of like, well, what's going on?
And
And
it's
it
usually when your hair's straight and you're like, oh, okay, so my hair every day is like, you don't like it?
honestly, that was it. I think it was, I remember so clearly my friend telling me like, whatever you did to your hair today, you should do every single day. And it was, and I had just gotten this straight weave done.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, okay. I totally get that. So then let's move into like grad school. And within your graduate program studying social work, I know you had mentioned that there was, ageism along with racism. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was again a kind of another culture shock because I grew up in this area of Virginia that wasn't diverse, and when I went to undergraduate, I went to a school that was really diverse. Half of our student population was minorities, and so then moving to Denver and my grad school program was not diverse at all. I felt like I had almost taken a step back, and I felt like there was definitely like this sort of looked down upon because I was younger. And it was just this very like one experience that people had coming into this graduate program.
Yeah. What was the age difference, or like how old were you compared to them?
So I was in my early 20s, and I would say I think the like average person in my program was probably in their late 20s, early 30s, and had been like working in the field and wanted to do like kind of a switch or advance a little bit. And so there was definitely lots of comments that were made about like, oh, well, when people come in right out of undergrad or things like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying to put you in that box. Where were the people, where were all those people in your program from?
Pretty much everyone was from Denver
Okay.
or
Yeah.
from Colorado at least. Yeah.
So that was a bit of a shock for them, maybe?
Yeah, I'm this, Southern girl who just kind of ended up here, and it was definitely just like a complete difference.
Hmm. Yeah, I live in Colorado too, and I think the one thing that I noticed about moving here, I tend to be from a pretty white state and city also. So I was surprised at how much when I moved here, they still tried to kind of put that box around me. Like I wasn't quite sure about things, or I didn't really know how to relate to people, or they were 100% sure they knew how to relate to me, even though I was telling them that they didn't. They have this like preconceived notion. So I feel you on that. So then when you moved here, did you go straight into social work here?
Yeah, so when I moved here, I started my program in June, I want to say,
Hmm.
and I started working in social work not that long afterwards here in Denver.
Hmm. Awesome. So the one thing that I kind of wanted to talk about in social work, I feel like Denver has a bit of, even outside of social work, I've been noticing a little bit, and I would love to hear. I know in our pre-chats we were talking about how it's not really addressed in the social working world, but it definitely is something that happens, and that's this white Jesus complex, where white people feel the need to help or save minorities or people of color because they're in this position that's so much better than ours. How have you seen the white Jesus complex represented in social work, and do you feel like it's being addressed properly?
Yeah, so I think white saviorism is definitely an issue in social work in the nonprofit industry that run really deep. My undergraduate background's in nonprofits, and I have most definitely seen it both in graduate school and working out here. This almost issue of like people feel like they should feel guilty for being white, and that like they have been picked to like lift up the color people, and that I think there's almost this equating people of color to like low income in a way that it's kind of described. And I've seen it just in class discussions. I've seen it in my practice at work of people just making assumptions a lot of the times. And also being like, oh my gosh, we have to help them, as if these people don't have the ability to help themselves. And I think that's where it really stems from is people feel like they're the only ones who can help these people, but people can help themselves. And I don't think it's addressed at all. I've really never seen it talked about at work or when I was in grad school.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Do you feel like bringing it up now, like even in where you work, that there would be some sort of like backlash towards you if you were to like bring it up? Like what kind of reaction do you think that you would get in your field?
Yeah, so I actually just left my current job. Last Friday was my last day. And
Woo!
yeah, I'm so excited. I start a new job on Monday.
Good for you.
But the times I did try and bring up issues around race, there was a lot of discomfort in people. There was some defensiveness. And in my area, I worked in child welfare. And so I did investigations of child abuse and neglect. And we talk about a lot of heavy things. We talk about a lot of heavy things with families, within ourselves. It's a hard job. And so I always found it weird that we would be okay talking about things like domestic violence and sexual assault with people who just experienced it, but within ourselves, a group of professionals, we don't even feel comfortable enough to talk about racism. And the summer of protests around George Floyd and Elijah McClain and Breonna Taylor really highlighted that. And my work building is actually right across the street from the Aurora Police Department. And so we were right there for all of the protests around Elijah McClain. And people almost want to like tiptoe around it, or they want to use inclusivity and equity as a synonym for racism, and it's not.
That is really interesting to me, the lengths at which people will go to avoid talking about racism. And it's so interesting that you work in a field where there are so many really intense topics that come up and that people still get stuck. I don't really know what to say about this, but I'm not racist.
And that's basically what it was no one wanted to, I think, be in a space where they could feel like they did something wrong. And I did send an email, I think this was when the protests around the whole thing with George Floyd had happened, to my administrators, just kind of saying I thought it was weird that no one had addressed it. And then they kind of passed the buck and then sent out a very vague email that didn't name racism or George Floyd. And then they were like, we're going to have a Zoom call about it. And we had a Zoom, and it was people of color who worked there talking about their frustrations. And then it was people who weren't of color. Essentially, it was just white guilt. And so it was either one person who said that they didn't see color, and then one person who got up there and was like crying because the colored workers were upset. And it was just the most unproductive thing of my life, honestly.
It's almost like this big white showcase, right? Like, I often wonder how come those things go out to an entire team, but they don't include input from the Black employees or employees of color. Like, why would you put out something to address an issue that directly like affects us without any kind of input or feedback of what it could potentially do to not only us, but everybody else on the team? And I think that one big response that I've heard across the board in a lot of different offices is if the email went out when BLM got really big and the protests were really big over the summer, that white people started getting very defensive and also almost overreacting. Like, I feel so bad about all of this. And it's like, yes, we all feel bad, but like this kind of reaction isn't constructive to what we're trying to do here, you know? And then it just makes it like a weird work environment where your coworkers now feel like they have to come by your desk or like do something. This is not what we were going for.
That is exactly what happened. It was me and another Black coworker. Our office is closed, but people still come in. We're working near each other, and our administrator came by specifically to talk about what was going on in this sort of weird way that was kind of like justifying their actions. Like they were trying to like get a stamp of approval from us, and was kind of like, well, Black Lives Matter. And then it just like left, and it was just, it just made me uncomfortable more than it did anything.
Yeah. I think that it does tend to have kind of a reverse reaction, which is it does make Black people of color more uncomfortable than it does making them feel included or like people understand. In actuality, it makes us really feel like you don't understand at all.
Right.
Like, I get kind of the response, which is like, well, we wanted to do something. And I'm like, okay, we hear you wanting to do something, but at what point do you ask the Black people in your office, like, what's the best thing to do? Or what's the best way to go about it? Or how do we communicate that this is important to us? Because it's just kind of like trying to find a white solution to, you know, this problem that doesn't really affect them in the same way that it affects us. And it tends to snowball and it tends to go in a real bad way. So I guess if there's advice that I could give to any office managers or anybody out there, if you're attempting to, you know, address Black Lives Matter in an office setting, please ask your Black employees for input and feedback before that all goes out, because it can go wrong really quickly.
Agreed. I think
yeah, go ahead.
people just need to be genuine about it. I think so many times they spend all this time crafting these perfected messages when it's kind of just being honest and genuine is what people want to hear, what people need to hear. If you say the wrong thing from the right place, that's going to sound better than you trying to say the perfect thing from this place of you trying to seem perfect to you and not connecting with me.
Yeah. It did almost feel kind of like a forced response. I remember back at the beginning of the summer, I was doing a lot of protesting, and I did have a lot of, you know, my online network kind of reach out to me and say, I want to be more inclusive of Black people at my job. I want to be more inclusive of Black people here and there and XYZ. And I was like, okay, then you just kind of you got to just start doing it. You don't need it to declare anything. You don't need to be like, and now we love Black people. Like, it doesn't need to be that. You just honestly start doing it.
That's all there is. And I think the sentiment that really is my pet peeve is when people are like, well, this has been an eye-opener. This has been this. It should not have taken a Black man getting killed in the street on a video that went viral for you to realize that there was work in your organization that needed to be done. And I hate when people say that, because I feel like that is just throwing away Black lives. Like, someone had to die for you to realize that there's work you have to do.
Yeah. So you don't necessarily need to respond to why you're leaving your current position, but do you feel like the new position that you're stepping into has a little bit more of that inclusion and diversity that would make you feel comfortable working there?
Yeah, so during my interviews, they were very open with the fact that the organization wasn't very diverse and they were trying to change that. But they even brought up in the organization about health inequities, about when I asked about what they were kind of doing, they talked about their committees around equity and the action steps that their committee has. And so that did make me feel like there was a genuine commitment. I think so many times in the spaces I work in, the spaces you've seen in, we see people who have words and there's no action behind it. And like you said, you don't need to declare, we love Black people. You just need to treat Black people like you love and value them.
Right. Yeah. Like they're part of the team. Really interesting. I love it. Well, I wish you all the best in your upcoming position. It's so exciting to start a new job. It could be very, fearful too, but I hope that it goes well for you. And I'm excited to follow up with you after you started.
Me too.
Okay. So now we are in Denver. I really want to talk about the crown. I keep calling it the crown.
I wish I had it for this live so I could pull it out.
Where is it?
I live in Colorado, but I'm in Mississippi visiting my parents. Yeah.
It's so good. So let's chat about how you even got into that circle. How did you find, I keep calling them beauty pageants, but please correct me if that is incorrect. How did you find yourself in that space and in that circle?
So I found myself in that space the way I think a lot of people find themselves in a lot of things, and they were scrolling on Instagram and one thing led to another.
Yes.
And so I honestly to this day don't even know how I ended up there, but I was scrolling on Instagram and the next thing I know, I ended up on this pageant page and I was really intrigued and I was like, wow, I've thought about doing pageants. I've never done one. Maybe I would do it. And then this particular pageant was in like October. So this was in January when this happened, and this big group pageant was in October. And I was like, well, that's really far off. And I feel like if I want to do one, I don't want to plan for it 9 months later.
Uh-huh.
And so I was like, well, let me start looking at pageants. So I was kind of just Googling, you know, searching, not really taking it seriously. And then I found this podcast about pageantry. And I was like, okay, well, like, I honestly don't know a single thing about pageants. The only thing I know is that the current Miss America, where she goes to school for grad schools, where I went to undergrad.
Nice.
And I met Deshauna Barbara, who was Miss USA. I met her a few years ago because where she went to undergrad was like 30 minutes from where I went to school.
Mm-hmm.
So I know nothing, and I'm listening to this podcast, and this woman talks about this video clip from that Miss USA pageant, and she said everyone should go watch it. So I was literally in the parking lot of my job, and I was like, well, let me look it up on YouTube. And I watched it. It just moved me. I was so emotional about it, and I had no idea why. And I was kind of like, well, if there was ever a sign, this is one. And so I found a pageant, which was the USA National Miss Colorado pageant. That was at the end of February, and I signed up, and I found a coach on Instagram and kind of just went for it.
Yes. Freaking yes. What kind of, well, before I want to talk about the confidence that you conjured up to do all of this, but was there anything in your brain that was like, maybe not, I don't know?
There was everything in my brain that was like, what am I doing? I've never done pageants before. I'm 23 years old. Who starts doing pageants at 23? You're going to look like a fool. How am I supposed to tell people this? Like, I was kind of like, you know, I am not a super girly person. Like, I just sit in yoga pants all day. I don't do my makeup that often. Like, who am I to do this? And that's what it came to do. I was like, who am I to do this? And then
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of had to take action, and I felt that way the whole time. But I had to just take action anyway.
Yeah. What did your your self-confidence building look like in those beginning stages of starting something that you had never done before? Sounds like there was a bit of imposter syndrome and self-doubt. Like what were you doing to build up your self-esteem?
I would not give in to the doubt. Anytime I had this specific playlist of songs that just really pumped me up that I had named pageant playlists. I had like a crown photo on my Apple Music. And anytime that I was doubting myself, I would just play those songs on that playlist and just feel into that. I just knew because from when I signed up to when the pageant was about 6 weeks, which really isn't a lot of time to get together. And so I knew that I just physically did not have time to sit there and doubt myself. And I was just going to have to get on that stage, and what happened happened.
Yes. Good for you. Did you hire a coach or anything?
Yeah, so I had a coach who I worked with like once a week. And then I pretty much found any and everything on the internet that I could, and was just squeezing it in. I was literally getting up at like 5 a.m. to go to the gym before work. I was working with her on my lunch break on Tuesdays. So just squeezing it in whenever I could.
That is so radical. Can you tell us a little bit about the other women who were there, and did you feel like racially different than the other women that you were competing against?
Yeah, so this system has all ages. So from princess, which I think is about 4 and 5, to the miss, which caps at I think 24, 25. In my category, in the miss category, there was 3 women, including myself, who were competing. And it was definitely not a diverse pageant. I think it was probably on par for Colorado, though, because it's not super diverse.
Right.
And I didn't feel like excluded racially. I think it made sense, the makeup of it.
Yeah. And what about the judges?
I honestly can't even remember the judges.
You're like, not even a part of my process right now.
Not even, I think my nerves were like a hair.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, it's really interesting. I was I have a little success pod for my business, and I chat with them a lot about the power of a deadline, where we can kind of like, tiptoe around a lot of different things. But the second there's kind of like a deadline or a purpose, it really makes you like get yourself in gear. And I think that has been, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because as you were saying it, I was thinking about my own business, or even starting this series. I was like, I don't know, there's other people out there that do all these great things, and who's going to listen or who's going to watch? And then the second I was like, I'm just going to do my first episode on this day. And I just rallied behind it. And then all the guests rallied behind it. I mean, you were part of like the first group of women that I asked to come on the show. And it was literally having that, like, I'm just going to launch this day, that I could not sit around and twiddle my thumbs anymore. And I think that
Yes.
having like a deadline or something that you can kind of put your eyes on, really, it begins to like, and I don't know if this was true for you. I mean, of course, I think a lot of our brain space, and especially as women and as Black women, we tend to be like, is this my place? Should I step up? What are people going to think of me, kind of thing? But when you have that date and that deadline, you're like, I don't have time for any of
Yes.
that. Like, I need all of you to get out of the room right now because I have other things to focus on. And it was really empowering once I asked all those things to leave the room, how much actually showed up for me. How like my badass bitch empowerment, I was like, I got this, I got this, I got this, just like really showed up, and it supported me in a way that I didn't really know was possible.
I think that's so true. I think once you put a date to something and you are like mentally committed, everything else just has to fall into place. And you just don't have time to entertain anything that's not hitting that goal.
Yeah. It's like, what's that quote? It's like, um, focus on everything that you want right now and say no to everything else. And
Yeah, for sure.
it's the same with your emotions. It's the same with your mental state, not just like, hey, you want to go out like for happy hour? It's also kind of like, hey, do you want this self-doubt to cripple you for the next 7 hours? You're like, no, thanks. No, thanks. So tell me what it was like to win your crown.
It was surreal. So like I said, I had this playlist of songs that I listened to 24/7. Anytime there was doubt, I was like, not entertaining, I'm going to put on this song. And so when I was crowned, one of the songs from my playlist came on,
Yeah.
and I was like, I started tearing up. I was like, this was really just divinely made, because there's like the coincidence of that happening is just out of this world. And so I just really felt empowered. Like I felt like I just showed up for myself. I felt like I showed up for myself, and everything else kind of just fell into place. And it really made me it really enhanced my confidence. And the thing is like, life's a pageant, so that we might as well just put it on stage. Like there's nothing in pageantry that you're judged on, that you aren't judged on in your everyday life.
Yeah. I really freaking love that one of your songs came on, because that is so true. It's I think a lot about alignment when those things tend to happen to me. I was like, oh, meant to be. Here it is. I love it. Awesome. So outside of pageantry, what do you do to maintain your self-confidence, and what do you do, I mean, to our topic, what do you do to maintain your personal positive self-images when you find yourself in predominantly white spaces?
I
Dominant.
think the biggest thing that helped me is having a strong feeling and understanding of self-worth, and then always being able to come back to that, because when you know who you are beyond reasonable doubt, no one else is going to tell you who they think you are.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it definitely was not an overnight
Mm-hmm.
process. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of tears. It was a journey. My journey with my hair is like a whole other story. But I think once I got to this place where I'm like, I am who I am, and I have all these amazing things about me, and you can like it, love it, or leave it. There's other people's opinions they don't concern me really.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big believer in self-development, and I'm a big believer in positive psychology. And so I just try and crowd my brain with positivity. And I think, like we were saying earlier, like when you are surrounding yourself with positivity, there's just no room for negativity.
Yes. Yes. Where do you go for your positivity? Is it books or podcasts, affirmations?
All of the above. I love podcasts. At my previous job, I was driving a lot because I was doing home visits, so I was always listening to a podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I love upbeat music. I have like a bad bitch playlist I play every morning out the shower.
Yes.
Um, I love reading, and I think that, and I love setting goals. And I think a big part of building your own confidence is when you're able to set goals and achieve them. And when you are the type of person who does what they say they're going to do, you feel so good about yourself. Um,
I agree with you 100% about those, like, fulfilling your commitments. And even if they're just like the commitments or promises that you make to yourself and nobody else knows about them, when I feel the most confident, it's when I like fulfill my commitments. I show up, I give 110%. So I feel you on that one.
Yes. And so books, podcasts, YouTube. I love Eric the Hip Hop Preacher on YouTube. I've been listening to his for years.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really where I just try and like get my positivity and like how are successful people living, right? And successful people aren't sitting there concerned about other people's opinions. They're not sitting there upset because someone doesn't like them. You know, Jeff Bezos doesn't care if people like him or not. That man has too much money to care.
All right. Literally. So I want to ask you before we close out our conversation, which I have absolutely loved and enjoyed from the depths of my heart. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
The best piece of advice I've ever been given is to focus on what you're good at. Someone told me that people spend too much time trying to strengthen their weaknesses and not enough time trying to play to their strengths.
Ooh. I love that. Focus on what you're good at. I guess I hadn't actually thought about how much time people do spend on their weaknesses. That makes a lot of sense.
And I think when you focus on your strengths, you see how what you think is like a minuscule strength really prepares you for so many other areas.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of my favorite books, and I was so grateful when I started working with my last boss. It's from a book that's called Good to Great, and it's kind of like a research study over the past like 100 years on companies that like started off okay and then ended up being like long-term great successes compared to companies in the time that they were started that were like really amazing and nobody's ever heard of them anymore. It talks about getting the right people on the bus. And when you're managing a company or you're a CEO of a company, that you are not going to be good at everything that needs to be done, right? So you focus on what you're really strong in, you figure out what you're not so strong in, and then you hire people who are way better than you at it. And you go, I know this is your strength, bring it on the bus, because all of us are going together to like the success, right? It reminds me of that. I always think about, I'm going to be good at what I'm doing. I'm going to hire people who are better at the stuff I suck at. And then we're all going to be on the bus together, getting to like our successful goal. It's wonderful. I've never heard that piece of advice, and I just want to say thank you.
I hope that was helpful. It honestly changed the game for me.
It is. It's definitely one of the, as I was sitting here, I was like, oh my gosh, especially as someone, I tend to be a little type A and I tend to like to do everything myself. So it's a good reminder to me to kind of back off a little bit. Well, this chat has been lovely. I am so proud of you. That I really do. I mean, at 23 years old, you're kind of blowing my mind with everything that you have going on, with the amazing insight that you're offering the world. I absolutely love that photo of you holding your crown. You are just lit up and so happy. And it really is one of those things that I tell women all the time, go claim your crown, go claim your crown. And then to have seen that photo of you, we were literally like, here is my crown.
Here it is.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for being on the show here with me. And I just want to thank everybody that tuned in live on Facebook. I hope that you will join us next week. I'm going to be speaking with Melissa Hale from Moss North Therapy. She's a massage therapist that focuses on prenatal and infant care. She grew up in a biracial household, learning a holistic lifestyle. And we're going to be discussing how Asian bodywork intertwined with being biracial has taught her the healing skills that she uses today. So we will be live again next Wednesday. I hope y'all will join us. Crystal, again, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yes.